Good evening to everyone in India. Good morning to everyone presenting from US. This is Priyanka Bhartia, founder of Admission Specialist and Managing Director, India Operations for AcceptU. Thank you so much for taking out the time, and truly the children, Tanish, Trisha, and Sumit have taken out a lot of time. They're right in their first semester, middle of their midterm exams, so that they can bring value and benefit to each one of you as you write your University of California essays. We also have Brad. Brad has worked with University of California as an admissions counselor and has been working as an AcceptU admissions officer as well. And I have to tell you, he's incredible. He loves his connect with children, but more than anything, he understands essays really, really well. Let's start by introducing Trisha. I love her feminist approach, as so am I. So she's a leader for Girl Up in India, very interested in gender studies and environment, currently at UC Berkeley. We have Sumit. It's very simple to sum him up. He's everything computers. I think he wants to study computer science, computer languages, coding, hackathons, and so on. But he does like to play tag a lot, again at UC Berkeley. Then we have Tanish, who's moved all the way from Lagos into UC Berkeley with great amount of interest in economics, business, but an absolutely outstanding manner as well. Then you have me, a journalist who loves essays. I work with 50 schools across the country. And Brad, who I've already introduced. So let's move right away into what our UCs is going to look like. Next page, please. Ninath, can we move? Okay, a quick introduction. You all know this, but I'll still say that when we look at University of California, it's a public university. They're big on diversity. There is nothing like what income or what ethnicity you belong to. But yes, you have to be super best and super bright. We have drivers of innovations, whether it's biotech, computer science, art, architecture. California is the hub of everything. I remember someone telling me that 80% of the income of the startups actually comes from the lands of California. So you have all these poor people beyond me who are part of California. I know Brad would not give up his life in California for anything. Yes, billions of dollars of revenue, so many products, so many startups, everything new and exciting has started there. We have UC graduates who are doing such incredible amount of work. When we speak of University of California, you all should know which elements or which colleges are covered. So there's Berkeley, which is the most popular, obviously. There's LA, Davis, San Diego, Santa Barbara, Irvine, Santa Cruz, and San Francisco, Riverside, and Merced. All of these colleges are outstanding. So don't think that it's only about UC Berkeley and UCLA. I've personally visited about 4 of them, and I can tell you Santa Barbara, San Diego, Irvine was so phenomenal. So never undermine that when you're applying. Next, Ninad. I would think I'd like Brad to speak about this. Brad, how does one select the prompts and what should people be looking at? Maybe you could speak to the children now.
Yeah, I would say that, well, first of all, hello, everyone. It's good to see everybody and to kind of share a little bit about the University of California system and the writing the essays for the application. I think that from what I see here on the page, I think this is a really great way to start. And in fact, many times what I encourage students to do is to kind of create bullet points or an outline, if you will, the same way you would for, let's say, an English paper or research paper. Create those bullet points for each one of the prompts, starting with the 4 that you're most excited about. And if you can't pick 4 out of the 8 that you're most excited about, maybe aim at 6 of them and start by blocking out what you think you're going to write about, using some specific examples of your activities, as well as traits and characteristics you would like people to know about you while writing the essays. So that's typically how I recommend folks begin the process. And then as they write their essays, it will become apparent which ones are the strongest of, let's say, the 6 that you choose. But it's good to start writing by focusing on your characteristics and the activities that you really want to focus on. And when it comes to choosing the essays, many of your activities may be applied to a number of different prompts. So start with that outline and then begin the writing process. Begin with that content draft.
Ninad, do you want to move on, please? Okay, so we're going to now look into each prompt. What we're going to do to follow our system is we'll have Brad first talk about what goes into this prompt, and then the student who's written the prompt will take over and talk about how he or she has gone about that. Brad, you could start.
Excellent. So this first prompt is about leadership experience and your impact on other people. Now, one of the biggest misconceptions about, I think, this prompt is that leadership must come from positionality, when it doesn't necessarily need to come from being the president or the head or the founder of something. That's all great. We want people to lead from those positions, but you can also lead in other ways. So what I'm looking for when I read through this is how did you develop as a leader? How did you change as a leader? If you didn't necessarily have a specific position, that's fine. Tell me how you impacted and influenced other people in a positive way. Talk to me about maybe your journey as a leader and mention even some of the struggles that you have and what you learned from those. So really when it comes to leadership, what I'm looking for is maybe a change in your perspective and how you developed and how you became the leader you are now. I think I'll go ahead and hand it over to Tanish to talk a little bit about, excuse me, about his essay.
Thank you, Brad. So adding on to what Brad said, pretty much when I was reading over the prompts, prompt one had a significant advantage for me. So Berkeley words its prompts in ways where it pretty much entices you to talk about personal interests, as mentioned before. And when we were talking about leadership, I knew I had an advantage because it coincided with my passion, which was MUN. So that kind of made it really easy for me to talk about this prompt. Now, as Brad mentioned earlier, leadership wasn't only about like, oh yeah, I'm the president of MUN, so that's the only time I can talk about. I kind of knew I wanted to talk about the struggles I overcame throughout my 4 years, how from like I started off as a delegate from the very scratch and I ended up being the president. So I knew word limits, I knew that like words were going to be a slight constraint because it's 350 words. So what I first did was I kind of broke it down into 4 main points. I started off by saying, oh yeah, I'm a delegate, I'm passionate in this, and how I struggled to move from there into slowly actually growing as an MUNer, and how I was first understanding how the concepts work while traveling to Qatar and stuff for different conferences, to then trying to help students win my role as a delegate because I've been doing it for a few years. And then from there, how I actually grew to become president. And then the last point I did was where I talked about me being a president, what other stuff did I imply and do, especially over COVID as well, because that's when I was the president of the club. And I talked about all these things, or all these little things I did, overcoming struggles to helping different students overcome those struggles in an easier fashion. So that's pretty much how I went about this prompt. So I kind of broke it down into 4 paragraphs because I have 4 points to talk about. So the first paragraph talked about the journey. The second paragraph talked about the movement from struggling to actually improving. The third paragraph talked about how I started helping others. And the fourth one was pretty much I became president and what else I did. And I think that was something that was pretty easy when I was working with Jamie as well, because I did answer so this prompt wasn't that hard for me to answer because I wrote something similar for another one of my Common App essays before with the help of Jamie. So that way I stayed concise and I could easily stick with around 350 words.
Excellent. Thanks, Manish. I appreciate that. That's really good. That's really good advice, and I appreciated that structure there and how you structured it and kind of focused on your journey and the impact that you had on other people in adapting to change. So let's go ahead and move on to prompts number 2, I think.
Ninad, could you move to the next prompt, please? So here we'll have Sumit present after Brad and then Trisha. So Brad, a quick take on this.
Yes, yeah, a very quick take on this. this is the creativity essay, and I think that this sometimes scares students, right? Because when they think of creativity, a lot of people like almost instantly gravitate towards music and art and writing, and those are creative ways to express yourself, but creativity can be expressed in other ways. So what I'm looking for is, again, like sharing what creativity means to you, and then how you've applied it to some of the things that are important to you, whether those are activities, your own personal expression. I'm looking for more detail on like how you applied your creative side to something that you're passionate about, whatever that passion may be. So let's go ahead and talk to Sumit about his essay.
Okay, so like Brad said, there's a common misconception about creativity being only in very specific areas, but I just thought I could use this essay to demonstrate my skills in computer science again. And that's what I wrote my whole application about, mainly focusing on that one strength that I have. So I wrote about how I was reading a bunch of research papers last year in March, and how I came across the study where they used X-rays to find out whether a person has COVID or not, and then I tried building a machine learning model for that, and how that led to further research in the field. And so yeah, it was essentially about generating an original idea from scratch and then using that to help others, and demonstrating my skills in computer science and innovative thinking through that essay.
Trisha, you want to go next, please?
Yes, thank you. Yeah, so in contrast, I talked about something that's, I guess, pretty much more straightforward, creativity. And I just kind of picked it because when I read the prompt, I thought it would be more fitting to write about something that I was doing because I enjoyed it like a hobby and not something that I was like my greatest achievement, or something that, you know, sounds good when I write it. So I just kind of talked about how playing the flute throughout high school was one of my favorite hobbies, and it helped me like express my creative side that my other commitments didn't allow me to, and how I really enjoyed the freedom that came with it. But I also talked about how it helped me grow like professionally and personally, and how though it was like a hobby, I also was invested in it and pursued opportunities in it, to grow and have new experiences. So the main event that I did in high school was work as a professional musician for a local production of Mary Poppins. So I got to like experience working with other professional musicians in the field and seeing music through a different lens, I guess.
Brad, I'm going to ask you a question right here, which so often children get very confused. There's so many essay choices for UCs. Do they focus on what aligns with the interest of their major, or can they actually just look at, so as you can see, Sumit has completely chosen something with his major, while Trisha has completely moved into something else. Is there a plus or a minus to either of the aspects?
It's neither a plus nor a minus, actually. So they're not necessarily mutually exclusive, in that if you have alignment in your essay, that's great for this essay, but you may not have alignment, and that's fine too. What we want to see, though, is alignment in some of the essays, or at least one or two of the essays. So for example, if I saw an essay, 4 essays and 4 insight questions answered, where somebody was focused on only their hobbies and not necessarily something that they wanted to study or their academic interests, that would raise a red flag. But even here, I would say that the essay, and Trisha's essay is a wonderful example, talking about a hobby and using something that she enjoyed as context for her journey. And that's really what one of the main points here is, that we wanted to talk about, and she talked about her creativity and how she expressed herself personally. But I'm also guessing that Trisha, in her other essays, talked about how her activities align with her potential major. So it's okay to choose something that's outside of the realm of your aligned activities or aligned major, but it's also good to balance out what you write about to include your major, your intended major, intended academic pursuits.
Got it. Can we move to the next prompt, please, Ninad?
So in this prompt, what is your greatest talent or skill? Again, as Trisha talked about, what we're really looking for is your journey and how you've worked hard to develop and demonstrate that talent or skill. The last thing as a reader I want to see is someone say, I'm naturally talented at this, and that's it, right? And the question is like, how have you worked to express your talent or skill or build that even further? That's what as a reader I'm looking for. And then Sumit, it looks like you have wanted to share some thoughts on your essay, so I'd love to hand it over to you.
So this was the easiest essay for me to write because I know what my greatest skill is. So I wrote about my journey with hacking and how I was just sitting in a class and I overheard the word hacking. And then I went home and looked it up. And then I found this class like 20 miles away and traveled there every day to learn it. And how over the 4 years I worked at different companies, I did different projects, one hackathon, and also learned about it in a much more well-rounded sense when you follow a moral code of conduct and you make sure what you do is ethical, and then how you can use that to help others too. So that's what I wrote about, and how hacking led me to discover more stuff that was also related to humanities and ethics, like I said. Yeah.
Can we move on to the next prompt, please?
Yeah, I really like that point there, Sumit. I think that was a good idea. You integrated the concept of ethical hacking and how that aligns with your characteristics. And I think it's important for who you are as a person to shine in your essays. And that leads us to prompt number 4, taking advantage of a significant educational opportunity or working to overcome a barrier. Again, we're looking for how your journey, how you've developed yourself over time, as well as to honestly name some of those barriers that you may have faced. And that barrier doesn't necessarily need to be something that's incredibly significant, but it can be, right? The idea is it's very loose how the barrier is defined. For here, we're really talking about how you've worked to develop yourself and how you've navigated challenges. So I'm looking for specifics on what you did as a student or as a person to overcome that barrier, or what you specifically did to better yourself in your world through an opportunity.
So before the children jump into this, Brad, I have to say that this is actually one of the toughest prompts that children in India tend to struggle with, because it is to be able to show how you practically applied your education. And a lot of times than not, in India, children do not get this opportunity. So it's a lot about understanding it creatively. And I hope that all 3 of you will also be able to say how AcceptU kind of helped you understand this essay, so that it'll help the other children understand what, beyond just writing it, what were the thoughts that went outside of writing it. That would be a great help as well. So, Tanish, do you want to start?
Yep. Okay. So this prompt pretty much talks about an educational opportunity we received or we somehow got through, and how we helped use this opportunity to like clear some kind of like educational barrier, right? So AcceptU does this thing where they kind of ask you to make sure you don't while away your summer. So for me, I had nothing to do over my summer, especially during COVID, right? AcceptU kind of told me that, yeah, you should look into summer programs and things like that. And I started doing that. And soon I found YLAC. This was like it was an international program, like mainly based in India, Dubai, and it was online. It did not really fit with my timings, but it talked about things I was interested in. It pretty much was a writing and research workshop, which talked about a bunch of different issues that were prominent in India, and then a bunch of us students have to work in groups with people we've never worked with before, work hand in hand with clients, and then write research papers for them to help them apply certain solutions and laws. So that was the opportunity I received because I applied and I got into a summer program. That's YLAC. In terms of the educational barrier, we were talking about what the workshops topics were based on. I was talking about domestic violence, which is a very prominent topic in India, and how to stem this, right? And we were doing this in terms of an economical standpoint for our clients. So pretty much the educational barrier we tried to clear here was first understanding the real roots of the issue of domestic violence in India, and then how we use this opportunity to imply and suggest certain solutions for a big company or a big NGO which we are working with, and how, even though this might have not like directly helped better the issue, it significantly helped in overcoming certain barriers maybe the companies faced with implication of certain solutions, because it was our job as students to research and find ways to go against the barriers and find alternative solutions to help stem domestic violence in at least small steps, or if not in like major regards. So that's what I kind of thought about when I was writing this essay. So it was simply just like a quick reflection of what I did in my summer program. So I talked about how I joined, what we did as a group. Then I talked about how I took significant advantage within the group, because I kind of talked about leadership because that's a prominent skill we should talk about, as mentioned before. And then from there, we just talked about how the essay was implied, or how the essay was then used in the NGO to like give them ideas to use and implement certain solutions to overcome certain aspects of domestic violence. Therefore, it kind of like overcomes a certain educational barrier due to implication of laws and other things like that. And yeah, that was pretty much my mentality towards this. And I knew because it was 350 words, I had to talk about the journey, and like a part of me wanted to kind of big up myself because it is an essay of yourself, of course. So I kind of tried to have like a small conclusion where I pretty much talked about my achievements in this program as a whole. I solely did that because why not, right? It is your essay, so might as well make yourself seem like the bigger person. Yeah.
So Meet, you can go next.
So I just focused on the first part of the prompt because I couldn't find a lot of educational barriers that I faced, and that's an honest answer. So I found this research internship by cold emailing multiple people and then cold calling the person from. I'll just go through the entire story. So um, I've had a 4% success rate writing cold emails to a range of people, and so I just wrote an email to like 25, 30 people um, last summer asking for a research internship, and I didn't get a single reply. And then after a month, I got this reply where the person had mentioned his phone number in the footer and just acknowledged the fact that he received the email. So I called him up and I spoke to him and I asked him for the internship again, and that's how I got it. So that was the educational opportunity that I had, converting the research opportunity into actually using my CS skills to finally develop something that could be used by an entire organization. And a lot of people will be using this innovation soon. So it was mainly about how, since people are wearing face masks and glasses, face recognition is becoming very difficult using the normal technology. So that's what I worked on, figuring out the solution to make sure face recognition works with even half your face or 1/4 of it. So yeah.
Trisha, do you want to go next?
Yeah, so when I looked at this prompt, I kind of was talking to Alyssa, my counselor, and she told me to basically just try to reflect on my activities throughout high school and think about which one really made me learn something and made me feel like I was looking at something from like a different lens. So I decided to write about this one project that I did in the summer. where I was working with like a nonprofit organization to create a mini documentary, essentially, where we reached out to survivors of the last generation that is living today that experienced the partition between like India, Pakistan, and Bangladesh. And we talked to them about their experiences. And it was my first time experiencing like interviewing people and transcribing those interviews and condensing it into like digestible content for people to see. And I talked about how I heard a lot of words and phrases for the first time that I'd never heard about before. And it made me think about the importance of like oral history and the importance of like passing on stories from generations to generations and how that plays a role in society. So my main approach was just to talk about like education and information knowledge through a different perspective, which was language and oral history.
Brad, I'm going to ask another question, which probably comes from the students, is what if you don't have such a strong topic? Like, obviously Tanish has chosen domestic violence as a boy to be able to get the sensitive side of the feminism and the problems that faced by them. And for Trisha to not just go into feminism and education and barriers, but actually do it across 3 countries which haven't had the best neighborhood relationship, so to speak. So, what if the children do not have such strong topics? What do you do then? Do you take on a topic like this, or should you skip it?
Yeah, and again, this is where the outline can be very helpful in kind of, I guess you could say, storybooking your essays, because you'll be able to determine using some specific examples from your activities and looking back at all of the things that you've done that have changed you, as Trisha indicated. That can help give you an idea of whether or not this is a question that you may want to write about. And keep in mind that there are a total of 8 personal insight questions, and you get to choose 4 of them. And you can choose any 4, and there's no weight given to one or the other. They're all considered by the application readers and the admissions committees as equal. So I would say if you don't feel very strong here, move on to another question and work on storybooking or blocking out what you think you would write about for that question.
That makes sense. And again, students, I do want you all to notice what Sumit said here. He wrote to 100 different companies before he got one response. So all of you who keep complaining and saying, oh, we don't get opportunities for research, well, it's not easy. But if you can be as determined as him, chances are you will get something too. With that, I think, Ninad, we can move on to prompt 5.
So this has a little bit of an overlap, if you will, between the last one, because an educational barrier could also be the most significant challenge you've faced. Again, it's what I'm looking for as a reader is how you navigated that challenge. Did you work through the challenge alone? Did you seek help and support from other people? How did that challenge impact you or change your perspective of yourself or your world? These are the type of questions I'm asking myself when I'm reading through essays. And again, this is about how this challenge changed you as much as it is how you navigated it. Maybe Tanish can talk a little bit more about this.
Tanish, do answer Brad's question here. I mean, the first thing he said is that, there's a bit of an overlap. Did you feel that as well, and how did you overcome? I know you did, so which is why I want you to talk about it.
Yeah, no, I was gonna bring it up as well. So before I start talking about what I did, I clearly noticed there was an overlap in terms of academic achievement. So I knew that to conclude this essay, I somewhat had to talk about, it could be something as basic as, yep, I started getting good grades, or I finally got accustomed to IB, or it could have been something more spectacular or broad or something that's impressive. I knew that there was an overlap in the sense that what the opportunity being presented here is traveling and becoming more diverse, and then academic achievement is the same as overcoming an academic barrier. I thought about it in that perspective, and I kind of realized that there was a slight overlap. So I wanted to talk about it in somewhat the same format. In my opinion, this was probably the hardest essay for me to write, because I knew I had a journey to talk about, right? Being a third culture kid, I've moved way too many times from places in India all over the world. I've just been moving, right? But I wanted to talk about change, right? Because that's a major thing. Because you have in a story, you always start by first giving a slight introduction, then you have the climax or the change in this scenario, and then from there, in this particular prompt, you talk about how you've bettered. Now, when I first started reading this prompt, I was kind of confused because I didn't know if the change had to be significant, like something extravagant, or did it have to be like something as small as taking help with a few friends. This was what Jamie helped me clarify, because I started talking about my journey. I started talking about understanding inclusiveness, different worldviews, understanding how to actually communicate with different people all over the world, and kind of like shift from ICSE to IB, and how the learning style is completely different. It all took time, but it eventually happened. Talking about that was pretty easy, right? Because it's my journey. But when I wanted to talk about the change, the one event that occurred, like the one event that occurred that kind of started benefiting me, I was confused. And when I talked to Jamie, Jamie said it could be anything. It could be something small that happened, or something which you did out of your way to cause self change. So in my case, it was me just making one friend, and then how that friend kind of babysitted me through understanding half of the things that I couldn't understand in the first place. So then I talked about it. And from there, towards the end, I was also kind of struggling with talking about academic achievement. But then I realized, right, an academic achievement is getting good grades in IB itself, because if you're struggling to do well in a different school curriculum, the achievement in that scenario would be that you're not struggling anymore and you're actually doing good. So that's what I talked about. So I talked about how I moved from India to Lagos, had a difference in culture, difference in world points. Everything was different. I did not understand what inclusiveness meant. I did not understand people. To one friend babysitting me, to going through all of this, and me actually understanding how stuff worked, to understanding how school worked and stuff like that, to me getting accustomed with IB, and then finally getting good grades or understanding the curriculum. That's how I kind of shaped the essay. Yeah, pretty much.
Yes, I've read that essay. It was really beautiful, so close to the heart. Prompt 6, please. Okay, so a prompt that no one selected. Can you imagine, children, that you would think of an academic subject that inspires you, and all of you would jump onto it, and no one selected this. So I would like Brad to talk about this, and then I'll talk a little about what I have seen from the Indian perspectives.
Again, there's major overlap here as well, right? So the academic subject that inspires you, this prompt can actually potentially overlap with prompt number 3. What is your greatest talent or skill? It can overlap with a lot of the different prompts. It can overlap with leadership. But basically in this prompt, we're looking up again for how you develop yourself inside and outside the classroom. And so what that means basically is this is a perfect time to share your journey with, like, how you got excited about something. So if that is computer science, like what sparked and ignited that fire for computer science and sparked that passion. And if you'll notice in a lot of our students' essays, they've shared that they started off with the context. And that's sometimes a good way to start this essay, is to start with how you were inspired to study this. And then talk about your journey and what you've done and the choices that you've made outside and inside the classroom to further your understanding of this knowledge. Again, this is a really great one if there's alignment as well. So I highly encourage students that have significant alignment between their activities and their major to talk about this, especially if there's a natural evolution of your interest and your passion. If you've worked to develop that, and that's what you want to study in college, I'd love to hear that. So that's what I'm looking for here as a reader as well.
I totally agree. So here's what goes wrong in this essay time and time again, is that you think, I want to study computer science, so let me say the computer science inspires me. But what you end up doing sometimes is you start repeating what you're doing in school. And I would really think that this is the one that, as Brad explained, think outside of the box, why or how it started to inspire you. And what have you done for it to become an inspiration in the future for you. And they've clearly said inside and or outside of the classroom. Read the prompt thoroughly and answer one or both of them. It's 350 words. I'd like you to focus on one if possible. One of the children, and I really love that essay, is she actually wanted to study business, and she talks about human resources here. And it's incredible how when she sits at a cafe and she looks at people around her and imagines the kind of things they would come to an HR head and talk about, it was revolutionary. It was amazing how she made it like a question answer. So she changed the structure, but she says sitting at a cafe. So, and then she speaks about this lady who's constantly shuffling her legs, and is she concerned about a particular problem of violence that she's seeing, or a particular problem of racism that she's seeing, and just little things like that that she put in. I thought that was an outstanding way to look at this. So yes, I can see all my 3 kids haven't taken into this, but I feel it's a fabulous prompt to consider, because you can really go outside of yourself and think, why do you want to study that subject for the next 4 years at college? So with that, I think we can move to the next prompt. Okay, Brad.
This is a great. Go ahead.
All 3 children tend to stick to all accept your children, I guess. So they tend to like the same prompts.
Well, it's a really great prompt because it's something that's near and dear to all of the University of California schools' hearts. They care about community. When you go to a school, you're going to make your friends, you're going to build friends, and you're going to make your own community at school. And it's going to look different for each student. It's not going to be the same. And so this is a really good opportunity to talk about and to share like how you've created community in your past, or what you've done to impact and better your school and community. This is, I think, from a reader standpoint, this is a good predictor of how you're going to survive and live and contribute and thrive at a UC campus. And so that's what we're looking for here, is what inspired you to act, to do this, to take on something for the community. How has this activity, or whatever you've done to better your community, how has it initiated change in your community? Has it had a long-lasting impact? Those are questions that we're looking at, or is there a problem that you addressed when you were thinking about this essay, a problem that you fixed when you were doing something to better your community? So I think the students are going to be able to give a better perspective on this than I would, because their essays, I can imagine, are going to sum this up pretty well. So let's go ahead with Tanish to go ahead and kind of talk about your essay.
Thank you. So objectively speaking, this was the first prompt I actually ended up writing to, because it talked about community service, and that was probably the easiest topic to talk about for several reasons. First, being an IB student, you're kind of forced to take on CAS, and CAS is all about community service. So in CAS, you're pretty much supposed to reflect on every single community service action you've taken. Therefore, you already know how to write certain things about the like certain activities you've done, right? And there are several opportunities all of us are presented with when it comes to community service, being in India, Nigeria, whatever the country may be, right? And I knew for a fact that I kind of wanted to write into the reader's sympathy. So from that perspective, it was pretty good as well. And honestly speaking, whether it be UC applications or any college applications like Common Apps or stuff in general, one of the prompts or one of the supplements for any one of the schools will have community service as a major aspect. So from that regards, when I was writing for Georgia Tech, their main supplement was community service. So I already wrote a 350-word essay. So for me, this was perfect because I might have paraphrased, say, 349 words, right? And so the way I looked about this was, I knew I had an opportunity in Nigeria because we were a private school and we had like a lot of events with different NGOs. We had fundraisers and things like that. And then I just talked about from there how I knew I had a good tie with this one company named ExxonMobil and how they worked with this small school on a beach, which wasn't very relevant in terms of social media perspectives and things like that, because not a lot of people knew about it, right? and they actually managed to teach students from grade 1 to grade 12, but they lacked resources. So me and my two friends, we decided to kind of take it upon ourselves, make it our class project, and actually help them. So this was my major project. So when I went on about talking about this essay, I pretty much started off by saying why I think helping the community is important. A quick summary on that. From what I did, how I started, to what we pretty much did as a group to help set up the library and help set up other different resource management things, and like ties for the school with other different schools, our school, companies, and how we managed to actually kind of make this like a year-long project and on rotation. So once we finished this project, we couldn't completely like finish the project because there was COVID. We kind of made the documents and stuff transparent so other students could use it on years to come. And we also set up ties with different companies, and we made them more socially actives, in the sense that people would actually know what's happening in their school, so people were more willing to help them as well. So that's pretty much what I talked about, and so I kind of broke this down into 4 points as well. So I first talked about why I think community service is important. Then I talked about stuff me and my group did to like kind of start off helping them. Then what we did in terms of like what all we covered, what all we achieved, and then in the end, I just talked about how COVID was a struggle, and then what all we did to ensure that the school the school receives aid in future years to come as well.
For me?
Okay, so before I begin, the first thing I want to say is I would really recommend that you write this prompt if you want significant community service experience, because Berkeley wants people who can make an impact. So I wrote about how I moved from London to Mumbai when I was 7 or 8, and how the Jew slums that were near my house, I saw a lot of kids getting bullied there, and I couldn't do anything about it. And then how over like the next 7 or 8 years, I did mixed martial arts and karate, and eventually after 10th grade, I started Atmaraksha, which was a non-profit to teach children self-defense, and I involved a lot of my friends and my coaches. And initially, it was very difficult to manage so many children, so I also got some of my teachers from school to help me out and ask them for advice. So I wrote about my entire journey over a number of years and how it eventually turned out into a really good organization that's still helping a lot of people.
Okay, so for my essay, for this prompt, I talked about Girl Up, which was pretty much like my main activity throughout high school, and I knew that I wanted to talk about it in one of my 4 essays, just because of like how much time I committed to it throughout high school. So for a brief context, Girl Up is like a global gender equality organization, and anyone can really start a chapter of it in their high school and carry out like awareness workshops, fundraisers, anything like that to further their cause. So we did so many things under Girl Up in high school, like bake sales, fundraisers, awareness campaigns, that I didn't really know how to shape this essay at first, because it was just like such an overwhelming, huge activity, and I didn't know how it would answer the question of what have you done to make your school a better place. So I kind of had to reflect on like the effects that my club really had on my school and how it was really making a difference. And one thing that I noticed was that our club, it wasn't something that was really intentional, but more like an effect of it was that it became like a safe space for people to also talk about their experiences or issues regarding like identity on our school campus. And it kind of became like a breeding ground for other clubs. Another like, I think a LGBTQ plus club started the year after I graduated, but the members were from Girl Up and they kind of met through Girl Up. So it kind of became like a networking place. And I talked about why that was so important and why we needed like a space like that in our school, just for people to be able to come together and be honest with each other. So I would say that for this essay, I really looked at my big activity and kind of had to highlight and connect the dots to whoever was reading the essay as to how it actually had an effect on my school.
So, Brad, I have a question here. If you notice Sumeet's essay, it's very local to understand what a slum means, to understand what the children are going through. Is that all right to do? You know, is it okay to highlight something really, really small but very specific to your neighborhood or your community, which may have a lot of Indianness to it?
Absolutely. I think Trisha said it best. It's about impact, right? They want to know, like the readers want to know, like what is the impact of what you're doing? And now the impact doesn't need to be global. If it is, that's great. But we're looking for impact on other people and however you define community, your community, how have you made your community a better place? And that can be changing the minds or changing the hearts of a small group of people or even one person. But we're really looking for, it doesn't need to be like a 200-person club that has changed the world. It can be changing the world for a small group of people. And so Sumeet's essay is really talking about the challenges, honestly talking about and addressing challenges folks are facing, and then a challenge that he saw and how he worked to address that challenge, you know, and that's what we're looking for. It doesn't need to be a huge group of people or world shattering. It can be small, but it's about impact, as Trisha said. It really is about impact.
And in some ways, if you notice, all three of them have left a legacy of sorts. Is that important to kind of highlight in your essay if you have done it?
Oh, that's a tricky question. You can, but how do you know you've left a legacy at the time that you're writing the essay, right? Maybe you have, maybe you haven't. But the reality is it's about impact. And so if you have left a legacy and it's something that's continued and you're proud of that, absolutely mention that. Absolutely. Like if your club has become the foundation for other clubs and provided the space and the opportunity for others to grow as well, you should absolutely mention that.
Got it. Perfect. I love these essays of all three of you. That was so beautiful. And Brad, I hope you get to read them. It was really interesting and very, very well done.
I haven't had a chance to read them yet, but I certainly do want to now.
I'm going to have them. So Alyssa, Sumeet's essays, actually I have all their essays. So I'm going to send this one specifically to you. And children, we do not share essays, but if you are working with AcceptU, we definitely like you to read some essays and understand. We also have specific packages where you can work with students like any of these three as mentors, with me, with Brad. We also do a complete comprehensive evaluation of all your essays for the UCs. So definitely reach out to us. Yeah, we'll move to the final prompt and then we'll send you the contact details.
Okay, so this is, in my experience in working with students and reading thousands and thousands of applications to the University of California system, this is one of the most challenging prompts to write about because it's completely wide open. You can write literally about almost anything. But again, it's important to provide context. If you're sharing something about yourself, lay the foundation of what you're sharing, whether that's you navigating a challenge, if you've had a dip in your grades and you want to address it, this is a good place to do that as well, to kind of talk about what happened there and then to talk about the steps that you've taken to mitigate those grades and to better yourself as a student. If you want to highlight a skill or a talent, this is another really great place to do that as well. But again, it's about showcasing your character and how you as a person have developed, and perhaps even how your perspectives on yourself and the world have changed here as well. That said, Trisha, maybe you can share a little bit about what you wrote.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, I think for this essay, the reason I chose it was because I knew that in one of my 4 essays, I also wanted to talk about like my experience living in both the US and India and moving back and forth between the two, but I didn't really feel like any of the prompts fit the story. Like it wasn't really a significant like educational challenge in my eyes, and I didn't feel like I could write a whole essay about the effects of it on my education. I just kind of wanted to talk about living in 2 cultures and how that affects like my identity with my own culture and the way that I look at it. So this was actually my Common App essay that I like shortened for the UC application. And the main focus of the essay was basically just how I grew up like celebrating Indian festivals, but in different settings. And how I used the idea of festivals to kind of just talk about how I noticed differences in cultures and the way that they celebrated festivals, and how they had people that I met in India and the US had different relationships to their cultural identities and the way that they talked about their own culture. And like the differences I noticed between like Asian American communities versus actual Indian communities that I was also a part of. And I talked about moving back and forth and the reasons that I did, and also how I grew from initially being a little bit like embarrassed or not really proud of my heritage or culture when I was a kid to becoming more immersed in my heritage throughout high school, through different projects and working with like NGOs and having to represent India and like global platforms and be like a voice for my country. Through all of those experiences, I kind of learned more and grew to a point where I was like more proud. So yeah, I thought that was important to include in my application. But because I couldn't really fit the essay into any of the prompts, I just used the additional prompt.
So
I think that's a
Nina,
real.
maybe you can go to
I'm
the
sorry.
contact page, but Brad, I'd love you to tell us, do you think Trisha's essay was meant for an open prompt like this?
Absolutely, 100%. And I think when Trisha shared something that was really great, and that's when you find yourself struggling to fit something that's important to you in a prompt, this is the best place to address it, because it gives you that open forum to really talk about things that matter to you and overlap. But I will say this, that if I'm understanding correctly, Trisha wrote about like a shift in mindset, right? Where there is this one idea in that journey of changing mindset and then developing identity and talking about the challenges and the struggles and the successes of that journey, I think is helpful because it showcases, again, character. And I think, I would imagine reading that essay, we probably learned a lot about who you are as a person, Trisha. And that's important in all of these essays. These essays aren't necessarily about all the cool things you did. We want to know that, of course. As a reader, I want to know all the cool things you did, but I also want to know who you are as a person.
So we're very, very short of time and the children are really occupied. So what I'm going to do is to wrap this up. I do want you to know that we are working with University of California Essays. We provide you mentors, readers, essay specialists, and even comprehensive evaluation from our top teams of former admissions officers. So do reach out to us with your queries. But let's end this with asking each one of our children in one line, if they have to sum up how to get into the University of California, what they think you should do. Trisha, let's start with you.
I would say in one line, it's to be honest about your experiences and don't try to sugarcoat things or write about things because you think they sound impressive.
So important. Love it, Trisha. Sumit, you want to go next?
I'd say be creative and innovative both in your essay and in the work you're doing.
Definitely. Danish.
I'd say don't stress about it. Yep. 1000%.
Very valid, Tanish, because I think when we are stressed is when we start messing up our essays. So I have to thank all of you once again. Thank you for taking out the time, Brad, in times of early decisions and early applications. Couldn't have been easy for you at all. Tanish, Sumit, and Trisha, all the best for all your endeavors at UC Berkeley. And like you all know, I'm always available to three of you. So with that, good evening, ladies and gentlemen and children. I hope and wish you all the best for your applications. Bye-bye. Good night.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye.